We only have 240 Ks left to go.
2 hours left.
Previously on Spawn Adventures, we made plans and prepared for our most ambitious ride yet. Shared our secret source for excellent custom riding gear. And began our smoky endurance ride to the north.
Vancouver Island is the largest North American island in the Pacific Ocean. But in a straight line, it's only 460 kilometers long and 100 kilometers at its widest point. Thankfully, the roads constantly twist and turn, but we've been on the roads real fast. Of course, when it does feel small, we do have the rest of BC to plan.
Back on our Alaska endurance ride, Aaron was having a much-needed break. It's important to note that a kid needs some significant riding experience before attempting a ride like this. If he hadn't shown such reliability in the over 20,000 kilometers he's ridden with me in the past, we would never have tried to pull off a ride like this in the first place. You see, riding with Aaron started over 2 years ago. Aaron was 8 years old. I discovered that for a kid to legally ride on a bike, he only needed to be able to touch the rear foot pegs. Hot damn, get this kid a helmet. So we started to ride quite a bit locally, but wanted more. So I asked him, want to do a big ride? Where should we start? He says, across Canada. I'm thinking, whoa buddy, let's start a little smaller. How about the island? Very bottom to the very top. And that was it. We started planning our trip right away, and before you knew it, my F800 Sport Tour was packed up with as much as we could fit on it. Ready for a week of island exploration, ending at Cape Scott. Aaron was pretty excited to finally start this trip.
Aaron.
And how old are you, Aaron? 9 years old. And we're going to be late because we're meeting people at a coffee shop who are going to say goodbye to us. So we got to go. So let's get on helmets.
Yep.
Come on, time to go. Bye-bye. Hello. Sarah.
We headed down to Oak Bay Beach, what we considered the bottom.
This is about as far south as I think we're going to go.
And headed out. This was our first real taste of freedom on the bike. We had just about a week and a general direction. The rest we could just make up along the way. In no time, we made it to Nanaimo, and the first thing I did on a trip without Mom is buy the kid a knife, of course. Helmet music is known to cause regular roadside breakdancing. We stopped by an old friend's house for a quick visit, and he showed us a motor bigger than Aaron, and a few other cool car restorations. Shortly after, we took our first rip down some gravel roads together. The road was freshly graded, so it wasn't bad, but we discovered that the ridges of loose gravel left from the grading machine were no fun. We got to Horn Lake and made our first bike camp ever. We took a chilly dip and hung out by the stream. We heard that there was parasites in the lake, swimmer's itch, so we stayed by the stream instead.
There's a melon on the table with a knife.
This is the kitchen.
Our big dinner was an excellent stew I made from scratch.
And wait.
Hung out and cleaned up.
Yeah, this is not very clean there. Yuck. Try again. We're gonna go to the caves.
Just before dark, we decided to take a quick rip up to the caves. Some of the caves are still open to explore after park hours.
Yeah, it's Horn Lake. There's caves here, and we're going there. And they're down this
The Horn Lake
direction.
Caves have been a known stop for travelers for many years since their discovery back in 1912. It was actually in 1945 when their popularity grew, and it was discovered that the natural formations were being destroyed by tourists. It took over 25 years before the area was finally protected by the government, and the Horn Lake Caves Provincial Park was established. This is why many of the caves are gated off and can only be accessed during park hours or with a guided tour.
What do you see?
We thought
Aaron?
it'd be fun to check a couple out anyway.
Duck and chilliness and caveness.
You wouldn't believe how much colder it is just past the entrance of the caves. And they're real slippery, and the light sparkles from the water droplets hanging from the ceiling.
Wow, this is creepy. And then they gated this section.
We'll have to come back and check out the caves way more next time. The next morning, we packed up quick and hit the highway. We were trying to keep our kilometers relatively short, about 300 a day. We arrived at a BC hydro dam and discovered they had campsites at the lower lake section. Set up camp real quick and caught a stupid looking animal in our snare trap.
They caught a human.
In hindsight, I wish we had planned more time there. We hadn't even scratched the surface of how awesome that area of the island is, and we are definitely heading back there soon. The next day we headed out and continued up island. Made a couple important stops.
I'm super hungry for cinnamon buns.
Well, we drove
10 of them. That's
This thing was massive and just came out of the oven.
the size of my hand. That's the size of the cinnamon bun.
A little further up the highway and we found a campsite. Not the kind of place I'd normally search out on a trip like this, but it was nice. Fairly private campsite with a nice view. And most importantly, a playground for Aaron. He needed more kids to play with than just me. The day led into another nice night. The next morning, we made it to Port Hardy, and this is the part we had really been looking forward to. To get to Cape Scott, we needed to ride down about 70 kilometers of gravel road. We had a lot of people telling us that we wouldn't be able to make it on a bike like ours.
This is where it begins. We don't really know what's going to happen, and I'm a little nervous. To tell you the truth, we're just going to take it easy and hope that we make it through okay.
It will, however, take a lot of skill to dodge the rough sections of the soft gravel. I'd planned to take it easy and keep the cargo safe. It was honestly no real problem, and I really like burning around in the dirt. I just have the wrong bike for it. Anyhow, we're all good, just hot.
Okay, now bring it out
So
a
I
little
showed
bit.
Aaron that soaking our shirts in the lake and then putting our riding jackets back on is the simplest way to
like
cool
me.
back down. Such an easy way to cool off and still wear your gear. We passed through the tiny town of Holberg. Not a whole lot here, but some small homes, a store, and a pub.
Where's over there? Oh! Aaron. Hey, Aaron.
Hey, all.
Hey. This is Holberg, and we're just awesome. Aaron just saw his first bear along the side of the road.
But the place had a history of once being the world's largest floating town. Kinda neat, really. Something I think we'll need to look into next time we visit the area. After a wrong turn and a blocked trail, we'd finally made it to the end of the road. We spoke with the good guy who runs the campsite up there. We found out you can't drive to the top of Cape Scott. We had soon come to the realization that the top of Cape Scott was impossible for us to reach on this trip. It was a day-and-a-half hike north, and we were not prepared to handle a hike of that size. The good thing was that the relatively short hike to the San Joe Bay from the campsite was just right. And when we reached the end of the trail, it was in no way disappointing. This place was vast and untouched. It was incredible to find such a beautiful place so deserted. It felt as if it was some scene from a pirate film, and at any minute a huge sailed ship would come floating into the bay. This first trip left us wanting more, much more, and is still an unfinished mission for us. With more time, better planning, and better camera equipment, we're going to revisit this trip with deeper exploration and finally complete our goal of reaching the top of the island.
It was only 15 minutes, but that was exactly what I needed. It was time to get up and get moving, and we were just outside Prince George and another fill-up. We've eaten up over 600 kilometers since Kamloops and now have 700 to go. Next stop, Smithers. Rolling further northwest to Prince George, we cruise on.
Occasionally on rides, you can discover that you're not alone. And suddenly you notice in your side view mirror that there's someone who's been swapping corners and enjoying the view just as you are. Depending on who they are, this can be a real welcome sight and be really uplifting to a long ride. Perhaps it's having someone behind you watching the riding technique, keeping you a little more in tune with lane position, smoothly carving the corners and perhaps taking them a little quicker and deeper than you might otherwise. If you do have the opportunity to talk, sometimes you might find there's a pretty cool guy or girl behind the helmet. We met Luke here, who just picked up this KTM from Alberta and is riding it home to Prince Rupert. We're actually still in contact with him to this day, and I would be surprised if we rode with him again someday.
Now that was gas stop number 5. We are now only 340 kilometers from our goal and should be in Alaska by nightfall.
It's hard to believe that we've made it even this far. We'd originally planned to do this trip over a year ago on our old bike. That attempt was a roller coaster that sure tested our determination. It began when we were prepping for the trip. I was doing some significant maintenance on the bike. I just want to ride the damn bike. So I'm just going to wing this video. It's what they recommend I use for my bike. It's a 1550. Hey, we were about 3 weeks away from leaving on the trip to Hyder and planned to complete our second goal we had of reaching the Alberta border together.
We downloaded some new tunes for our helmets and went for a test ride on our favorite local road. Now, we knew this road, and had ridden it countless amounts of times.
What happened next was a hard lesson to be learned. The new music in our helmets had us gently pumping left and right corners. Very familiar corners. That night, the sky was strange. The sunset seemed to turn everything monochromatic. We made our corners smoothly, and not even very fast. And then, we were caught by surprise. Someone had chewed up their gravel driveway, kicking the rocks all over the lane. With the odd light of the evening and the expectation of the road being clear, I rode straight through the sea of gravel, carving the corner no different than the last. The rear wheel kicks out and the bike spins into a small ditch.
We landed on our sides, sliding a short distance. A crappy leather jacket slid up my chest, giving me a taste of road rash on my ribs and knee.
We had Aaron's riding suit on order when this happened, and he would have been completely fine if he was wearing it. We picked up the bike, checked it out, and rode it home. The important lesson here is that the rider always has to stay focused on the road. Never assume the road surface will be the same. The bike turned out to be a complete write-off, and we had to say goodbye to our beloved Beamer. That bike had a good life though, and I had put close to 80,000 kilometers on it. Lots of those with Aaron.
That was a huge bummer, and the trip was a bust without a bike.
I sent an email to a friend and told him what had happened, and that we won't be able to make the trip to Alaska with him now. Later that night, he replied and said,
"Hey, I know a guy who's selling a bike. I'll buy it for you. Take the trip. When you get back, buy it, or we can sell it. Probably make some money off it."
Of course, I said, hell yeah, let's do it. And that's where the Honda XL 1000V came from. I got it insured, and 3 days later, we had it packed.
Really high.
Waiting for another ferry. Now, as it turned out, the road to Hyder had received a ton of snow the night before. A decision was made while on the ferry to scrap the Alaska ride, and the rest of the group were heading to San Francisco instead.
Reaching the Alberta border was an important goal for us, so we decided to continue to head across the bottom of BC.
We took the #1 highway, or the canyon, and checked it out a little.
Hell's Gate Air Trail.
Yeah.
Fraser Canyon, British Columbia, Canada.
we continued on.
Made it to a friend's house in Kamloops. Now, we don't have any footage of it, but the next morning, we headed out for breakfast. In the parking lot, I was pulling a U-turn, and a truck pulled out in front of us, and I dropped the bike. Not the end of the world, but the clutch lever snapped. We were dead in the water, and to top it all off, I pulled my back out when I was trying to lift the bike up. We were, however, able to use some JB weld and glued it back together, and somehow made it back to my friend's house, where it fell apart again. Although all other motorcycle stores were closed that Monday, we managed to find a small shop that had a lever that we could modify to fit. Now all we needed was some way to get all the high weight off the bike. That's when I remembered of Trailtail. Their trailers would get all the weight off the bike, and they were just down the highway in Kelowna. We met up with the guys and they hooked us up right away. And all of a sudden the bike went from this to this. Wow, that was so much better. We continued on. Whoops.
Hey.
Ironically, we stopped to take a closer look at a hydro dam, and I left the ignition on. Quick tip, when you buy a used bike and immediately take it on a trip, replace the battery first.
So the bike and the battery died. Sucks.
That short break completely killed the battery. That thing was like a freight train, and I wasn't even sure if the thing would kick over.
It worked! Yeah, I did!
We headed through Nelson and replaced the battery. Then headed to a wild campsite called Toad Rock.
What are you doing? Where did you come from, man?
Had a fun time there. Crazy place.
So then, do you have a clean? I said that one already.
Go fish.
The next day we really look forward to. Once you take the ferry from Balfour to Kootenay Bay, the road down to Creston was said to be the top road in BC to ride. Number 1 in BC for those that are familiar with the Destination Highways books. It really was a spectacular ride. I wish we could have captured it better with our camera, but that old thing had its limitations. We really struggled with the old basic camera we had, and it's one of the reasons why we're missing so much of these trips. We've since replaced it in the best way we knew how. I'll tell you about that story later.
The rest of the trip was filled with good times and great views. We found this trip taught us to stay positive, and there's often a solution right around the corner. And whatever the problem you may have, don't give up. Keep trying. You'll make it.
Back on our way to Alaska, the heat and fatigue was making the riding a little tough at this point.
It's really hot. You alright?
Yeah.
We only have 240 Ks left to go.
2 hours left.
You know, we actually enjoy the journey on a bike in the tough situations as well. We've been known to just make up a reason to go for a ride sometimes, no matter what the weather. When we realized that our old camera had to go, we decided that the best way to replace it was to find a good used one that was a decent distance away and make a trip out of it.
For us, it seemed like the perfect way to pick up a new camera, considering what we plan to use it for.
This camera sucks.
I know this.
What are we doing on this trip anyway? What's the purpose of this?
I don't know. Maybe buying a new camera.
Yeah.
So off we went, crossing the border into Washington State.
The weather wasn't perfect, but that's all part of it. If we wanted a predictable, climate-controlled experience, we would have taken the truck. It's your closeness to the environment that really makes these traveling experiences real.
And angry, apparently.
And we really think this stuff is kind of funny anyway. And when you're prepared for it, you can be quite comfortable. We made it to Wenatchee.
Yeah. Hi.
Here we met a nice guy with a camera.
Little adventure, huh? Yeah. Here.
Pristine condition and a great price. Although I think it would have been cheaper to buy it locally.
But where's the fun in that?
Next time on Spawn Adventures, we eat up the final kilometers of our IBA endurance ride, cross a long sought-after boulder, and explore an extraordinary place. We continue north and into the Yukon.
Steamroller!
Then loop back down the east side of BC. It's here where we had a pretty frightening moment and a situation that transforms our BC adventure, and we were forced to leave the bike behind.